Thank you. Mike, Howard, thank you both very much. And I think our challenge now is we will all begin to try to walk more erect, correct? When it comes to targeting. I love that visual. I want to invite our last speaker for the day to the stage. Belle Frank is EVP, Director of Strategic Integration and Growth at Y&R, the creative agency for the Optum brand. And we thank Pam Malone at Optum for her help in bringing Belle to our stage today. Look, Belle is a longtime friend and family of the ARF. As Gail noted, Belle was formerly on the board of directors. She has a tremendous experience across a vast number of consumer categories. She and I, for example, were trading stories about how the businesses I'd worked on in my career were running in parallel to businesses she worked on at Y&R, and realized that only now, after many years, are we getting to cross paths officially. But the fact is that Belle has been with Y&R for more than 25 years, but interestingly enough, she holds a bachelor's degree in French from Tufts, but a master's from the Harvard School of Education in the effects of communication. She also teaches research at City University of New York, and she is an author of The Advertising On-Ramp. Is that correct? Stay away. But we want to invite Belle to our stage to talk about brands. So Belle, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So in the spirit of contradictions, let me just say that there's probably some contradictory feelings in the audience right now. Like, you might be mildly curious about what I have to say. It's kind of a compelling thought, but it's the end of the day and you really want a beer. So I would argue that I'm going to try at least keep you entertained for another few minutes. So in our opinion, and I've spent my life in the creative agency space helping people understand the value of research. I'm finally, right, we're now, right, it's our time now, guys, so we have to take advantage of it. But what I would say to you is more than ever before, that notion of conflict and contradiction is really critical to understand. The truth is, I don't have to talk about these depressing trends that a number of speakers talked about, right? If you focus too much on it, those millennials and the economic situation, the political situation, and the ecological situation, you just be depressed all the time. What's much less depressing, at least to me, is that the value set for Americans is stable today. The last 10 years, all the studies show that there's some values that are pretty consistently American, with a couple of newcomers. And the newcomers are things like both purpose and ambition, both learning and diversity. How did those values enter the set of stable values? What does that mean, and why is that happening? The other thing we see is that the more we can multitask, the more we are conflicted. The more ability we have to do more things at the same time, the more we're pulled in many, many directions. And at Y&R, we call this tensity. It's the convergence of two or more contradictory forces that create some kind of friction and pressure, but they result in really excitement and energy. And it's interesting that the Mia folks spoke about it, the furniture folks spoke about it. There is a need to actually bring together both sides of your personality. I heard it at the end too. You don't want to be a single brand that's a brand with a single dimensional personality, because it's boring. But what you want to be is a more interesting person, and as a brand, you want to be a more interesting brand. So this is work that was presented by Y&R at South by Southwest. It's also work that's informing a lot of our strategic recommendations today. So think about our culture, and think about the icons in our culture. So you have somebody who is at a time both seductive and innocent. I don't have a furry animal, but I do have Dr. Seuss, right? So if Dr. Seuss creates a two-headed character, of course he has to put two hats, because that's logical and insane at the same time. And we have the fundamental contrasted individual who is both tyrannical and totally charismatic. I watched that movie on the plane last night, and I thought, oh, he really is awful, but he really is compelling. So I use that spirit. And then one of my buddies for many, many years, likes to use the Marvel characters and the Avengers to talk about tensity, right? Because the Hulk, he's this introverted, geeky guy, right? But then he's powerful. Or Iron Man, it's really his humanity that kind of makes him a much more interesting superhero. So he's not just all one thing. So you see it everywhere. Once you identify it, you see it everywhere. I always like to think that research's job is about 80% confirmation and 20% inspiration. Because if I told you something you never thought of before, you'd think I was wrong. And if I tell you something that kind of goes with what you think, but introduces another concept, then maybe I've done my job. So the notion of tension or tensity is everywhere once you see it. And I'm going to talk about three tensions that we see in consumer behavior today, and then talk about how they affect brands and what brands have to do about it. So let's start with, I need to be busy and I need to slow down, right? We heard about it from the museum people. People don't want to waste their leisure time. Isn't leisure time, by definition, supposed to be not productive? So what does that mean? I have to be productive during my leisure time. I don't want to waste it. It's very, very conflicted. At the same time, who here doesn't want to slow down, right? I work on an insomnia drug. Susan was nice enough to talk about it. And the whole world is tired. Who here is tired, right? Everybody. Who slept well last night? Nobody. Who didn't get enough sleep last night? I think if you could solve the I'm tired problem, that's a big problem for marketers today. You could really make a lot of money. So people complain. With that leisure time that they don't want to waste, they don't have enough of it. So they're running around. They'd rather have more time than money. They'd rather have fun now than worry about the future. So somewhere there's a conflict. Here's another one. I'm simplifying, right? And yet I want more rich experiences, right? Simplification's everywhere. Get rid of products that don't bring you joy. Get rid of stuff. Streamline. Get rid. And yet 71% of people say experiences are more important. I need experiences. I need more. I need to be doing more different things, adventure travel, more experiences. So no matter what, there's a conflict between simplification and busyness. Okay, then you have, and I credit the millennials with this, it's all about me and it's all about we, right? So I gave a lecture not long ago at a very prestigious New England university, and I was the advertising person, right? And it was a liberal arts program. And somebody said to me, well, Belle, did you ever have to advertise something you don't believe in? And I thought to myself, ooh, let's think about what question the person's gonna ask. So I said, I'm not really a dope, like what? Instead of answering the question, I said, like what? This comes from having children. And the person said, does anybody want to guess what the person said? What do you think the person said? That's what I was expecting, right? Cigarettes. Maybe I'd get pharmaceuticals, right? You know what I got? Soft drinks. So I started to laugh. So I would argue that the next generation has really thinking about these things, and every corporate person will tell you this. Look at the power in corporate social responsibility. Business has to be the good guy now. I'm looking for a life-affirming job. It was hard enough to figure out what I wanted to do for a living without expecting it to be life-affirming. So it's a really tough market. Okay, and it has consequences. Everybody needs to know everything. We want to be better and smarter, right? And at the same time, it has to have meaning. It has to be real. Okay, so it turns out that it's no different for brands. That brands are facing these contradictions, they have them built in, and the best brands, the strongest brands, actually embrace both sides of their personality. So in 1993, Y&R decided that we should be the smartest agency about brands. And I was fortunate to work with the research team that developed something called Brand Asset Valuator. We're in a lot of textbooks. We're quoted a lot. Martin Sorrell says he bought Y&R because we invented this thing. He then built his own tool. Sorry, Millward Brown. That's the story I know. But what I will tell you is that we invested as an agency, which never happens, over $100 million since 1993 of our own money to just be smarter and smarter about brands. And I remember saying some years ago, well, once you figure out the theory, you don't actually have to keep proving it, right? You kind of know the theory, and then you don't have to keep proving it. So I offer this up to you as a suggestion for how to think about brands and the jobs for brands. What is amazing is when you present strategy, when you're grounded in Brand Asset Evaluator, your strategies are just sharper. And I'm proud to say that we've been very successful with this tool. The study is category free. So what happens is we just evaluate brands. And then we can benchmark. So when we first started working with Optum and they said, we want to understand the tech space, we had a basis to understand the tech space. Independent, most clients can't field their own studies that go beyond their categories, and we had a basis to kind of inform that. So I'm going to talk about the 4 pillars of brands, and I'm going to talk about them the way I've been talking about them for a long time. So they're called differentiation, relevance, esteem, and knowledge. But differentiation, which sounds very functional, is really about brand meaning and basis for choice. So one of the things I find interesting to do when I talk about brands is what is a brand? And the definition I like to use is it's a promise of an experience. And if you use that definition, it gives you a basis to choose that brand. So we heard today about Blue Dot, we heard today about Mia, and all of those brands are really working hard to give you a basis to choose them against other brands. And so all of these lessons are about figuring out how to leverage the contradictions in your meaning to make a better to get a better committed user. So a brand has meaning. We all introduced ourselves today during the networking time, and we said, hi, I'm so-and-so from somewhere, right? And that's about whether or not that's a meaning, right? Now I know something about you. And then I decide that that's either interesting to me and relevant, or not so much. I meet a guy in a bar, he says he works at Goldman Sachs, I think, oh gee, that's interesting to me, or it's not, right? So it's relevant if it seems interesting and appropriate for me. And then if he lives up to expectations, right, then I like him, right? I don't know that in the beginning. So liking is important too, but it's based on that promise. So interesting, relevant, stands for something, relevant, I like it. And then ultimately you get to this pillar about knowledge, beyond awareness, truly understanding the brand. And we know that's what it takes to build brands because we have 20-something years of data in some gazillion number of countries from some gazillion number of consumer interviews. So once you know it, you don't actually have to keep thinking about it. You just have to use it to figure out what it is your brand should do. So those patterns tell stories. The brands with momentum have meaning more interesting than relevance, right? So you have some of the emerging brands, you have Etsy, you have Tesla, you have Method. Those brands have momentum and solid meaning. And then more people have to get to know them, right? Suppose you're liked better than you're known. That's a good thing too, right? I like you, and I'd like to get to know you better, just like a person. Now think about a brand that's relevant but has low differentiation. I use it, right? But I probably could use anything else to substitute. And now think about a brand that's better known than liked. That's a tough job, right? They know you, but they don't like you very much. So what they know is going to be hard to change. You're going to have to really behave differently. So we plotted on a 4-box model, and I'm going to show you some data in a little while, which is the reason I took you on this little journey, just to figure out what you want to be. If you're a new brand, it's okay to be in the lower left. But what you want to do is you want to keep solid meaning. So now all of us who just experienced Blue Dot for the first time, that brand now has meaning to us, and we have to figure out now if it's relevant. Think about leadership brands. All 4 pillars are high. Think about brands that are interchangeable, and that's the thing you want to avoid. So it turns out those are magnetic gizmos. I don't know. I don't really love this picture, but the BAV gods like it. So the truth is it's grounded in that tension because across brands, across countries, differentiation and relevance are not correlated. You don't automatically get it. You don't just buy it. You have to work it. And so what we understand is that brands that do very well are able to bridge the gap. It turns out today, studying brands, that there's image redundancy. In addition to measuring our pillars, we measure 48 brand personality attributes around the world in a whole bunch of languages. And it turns out that for the last 20 years, the imagery is the same. Brand to brand, imagery is the same. But what a brand needs to do is figure out how to drive levels of equity and advocacy that make it more compelling. So, I just pulled a couple of examples. Think about brands that break away from their category. I know it's hard to read, right? A brand like Kashi versus the cereal category. A brand like Axe versus the deodorant category. A brand like Trader Joe's versus the average supermarket. And what a brand like Southwest, that's popular out here, versus the average airline. And what you find is that those brands are pulling together imagery from both sides. So, how do I know that? Well, we just do, because we look at all the imagery, we plot it, and we figure out what are opposites, and then instead of just making up our brand personality, we actually ground it in data. So just a few examples. Ben & Jerry, big leadership brand, way beyond ice cream, right? They make ice cream and they make a difference, right? And nobody who thinks about Ben & Jerry's only thinks about them as making ice cream. Okay, another couple of examples. Walmart, right? Walmart's a category killer, right? They stand for one thing in their personality. Now, it's a pretty powerful thing. It does pretty well for them. What I'm not going to show you is the Target data. Target actually is a client of Brand Asset Evaluator, and it looks, even though I'm in Minneapolis, and it looks way different from Walmart, but what I will show you is the Kmart pillar. So the Kmart, no basis to choose it. Sure, if it's down the street and my kid needs a notebook at 11 o'clock at night, I'm going to go there. But if Target were my option or Walmart were my option, the basis to choose the others are just better and stronger. Sometimes a brand can lose that intensity. So Gap started out with opposite meanings. It had both comfort and style. But it lives in a world of throwaway fashion. And the arrow goes down since 2002 for Gap. So compared to H&M, compared to TJ Maxx, compared to Zara, compared to its own Old Navy even, the brand does not sustain the position that it started with. So you can do a pretty good job of think about Target and Cheap Chic, guys. Wouldn't you much rather go there? So it's not so easy. Okay, when he invented the company, and I was mad at him in the movie, boy, right? His thought was, I'm going to bring together humanity and technology, right? And think about the way he launched the brand. All those innovators talking about how innovative they were had nothing to do with the products. So before we knew about nonverbal, and before we could use neuroscience to measure these things, somebody intuitively understood that a brand had to promise an experience, and that experience was reflective of all the innovators who used it. So quite remarkable when you think about it, and over time again. I know I hate when advertising people use Apple as the example. I always try not to, but the BAV data looks really good. Okay, so in the tech space, very crowded, they still own it. Then you have Nike, right? You have everyman and you have empowerment, right? There's an athlete in everybody, right? And they reflect it in their marketing, right? The shoe works if you do, right? So bring together two sides, and it dominates. No matter what you do, dominates globally. The brand stands for that meaning and continues. You know, we heard talk today about coordinated creative strategy, and I look forward to continuing that conversation because the strategy has to be coordinated. That's actually great language. That doesn't mean the messaging's the same everywhere, right? That doesn't mean the tactic, that doesn't mean the matching luggage kind of integration. It means coordination. It's a much better rule. And in the world of tensity, thinking about both sides of the meaning can actually open up a lot of different options. This brand consistently strong in the US. How can you be both rebellious and about the team, right? Camaraderie. How can you have a line called United by Independence, right? If we're all so different, how come we're all in Harleyland? So the truth is, over and over again, It's a clear leader in brand asset evaluator versus its peers. So what I would say to you in the world of very complex brand and communications opportunities, you have to make your brand more exciting, more interesting, and more compelling. And some of the tools we have don't help us do that. And in the spirit of helping the brands truly differentiate, we have to use all the tools available to us. So what I would argue is, if people's lives are multidimensional today, and there's no doubt that they are, the media is multidimensional today, and we heard evidence that we're supposed to really appreciate that today. Don't try to reconcile the tension, but play to the sides. Figure out how you're going to deal with what you are. Do not be boring, because boring will not differentiate. And I would argue that in the world of the future, when media is only going to get more complicated, you've got to anticipate that you've got to both insulate from competition and continue to evolve. So that's me. I went fast. I'm a New Yorker. I talk really fast. So apologies for that, and thank you very much.